Everybody, welcome to Inside Quest. We are the expert moderator for your mind, and our goal is to bring on amazing people who can help you get to yes in your life. And if you're looking to negotiate your way to the best life possible, there is sincerely no better guest than the man joining us today. He is the co-founder of Harvard's program on negotiation and is one of the world's leading experts on negotiation and mediation. Now, a lot of people claim to be experts, but today's guest is faux real. In the 80s, he helped the US and Soviet governments create crisis centers designed to avert accidental nuclear war. A worthy goal, in my opinion. And he co-founded the International Negotiation Network with former President Jimmy Carter. And the organization was aimed at ending civil wars around the world. Now, talk about believing in your skills and setting the bar pretty high. And the best part is that it's working. In an advisory capacity, he helped end a civil war in Indonesia and helped prevent one in Venezuela. That's pretty impressive. And for the past 35 years, he's served as advisor and mediator in major conflicts all over the world, ranging from the Kentucky wildcat coal mine strikes to ethnic wars in the Middle East, the Balkans, and the former Soviet Union. And he's taught his unique negotiating strategies to tens of thousands of corporate executives, labor leaders, diplomats, and military officers the world over. But here's why I wanted to have him on the show. His background actually isn't the boardroom. He's a Yale and Harvard-trained social anthropologist who approaches the art of negotiation from the human side. He's not talking about dog eat dog or bending people to his will. He's talking about narrative, story, and identity. He never loses sight of the people involved in the struggle. And that's why I think he's had just unparalleled levels of success, not only in helping diffuse global nuclear tensions, boardroom battles, and civil wars, but with helping such disparate groups as the Bushmen of the Kalahari and the clan warriors of New Guinea. He's tapped into something universal in our humanity, and that's something that I think we can all learn from no matter what we're trying to accomplish in our lives. He's written and or co-written a ton of books on negotiating, including the all-time best-selling book on the topic, Getting to Yes, which has over 12 million copies in print. Please help me in welcoming the best-selling author of, among many other things, Getting to Yes, Getting Past No, and Getting to Yes with Yourself, the man who is helping end and avert civil wars, William Ury. William, thank you so much for coming out, man. It's a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure.
So the first thing that people said to me when you showed up today was, he has very smiley eyes. I bet that helps in negotiating.
It does.
I have to imagine that it does.
Yeah.
And if I can start with the elephant in the room, is that okay?
Sure.
Why aren't you aging? You've been doing this for 40 years,
Yeah, that's true.
if I'm accurate on that. And it is there like a portrait of Dorian Gray in your house that's aging just horrifically?
I am aging, but it's maybe it's negotiation keeps you alive. I don't know.
Not bad. Do you really think that's a big part of it, just having fun?
I do.
But it's super high tension. Like, I was reading some of the stuff that you're doing, and as I was writing your intro, I was literally like, this is freaky. I want to think like I'm up to some big stuff, but I am not trying to avert nuclear crisis, nor am I ending civil wars. Like, that's high tension. And as somebody who's had Hugo Chávez inches from your face yelling at you, that seems super high stress.
It does. But the funny thing, Tom, is that we read all the media stuff, and we get this fear. Fear of terrorists, fear of this, but it's like if you dive into it, you find a place of relaxation or safety. It's funny because one of my projects is developing, believe it or not, a long-distance walking route throughout the entire Middle East. So I walk
the path of Abraham.
The path of Abraham.
Tell people about that.
Yeah, it's basically the idea was because I worked on getting people together, Israelis and Palestinians and so on for so long, but I thought, it's stuck. Why not go out of the box and get people going for a walk together and take the power of story and the story that unites that entire region, which unites most of the world, is this journey that a man named Abraham supposedly took 4,000 years ago in search of himself, and where he's known for hospitality. So over the last 10 years, my colleagues and I have been developing this path. It's kind of like an Appalachian trail. The amazing thing is you walk in the Middle East today, which is a place that we think of as dangerous.
For sure.
The poorest person will welcome you into their tent and try to offer you something because it's the spirit of Abraham. It's the spirit of kindness towards strangers, of saying that anyone is welcome. In fact, their phrase there in Arabic, "Ahlan wa sahlan," means welcome, you are among family. And that's what you hear. So you're expecting to find danger, you're expecting to find hostility, and what you find is the opposite, which is hospitality.
That's a through line in a lot of your stories of like super high tension moments. You've got the helicopter pilot flying into the jungle. There's hundreds of people with AK-47s, and instead of cocooning himself in the helicopter and hoping they don't shoot, he actually gets out and greets them warmly and really flips the dynamic. You've got the tale from Hugo Chávez of wanting him to feel heard, and so just listening even though he's sort of going at you, and how that changed the dynamic and led to a Christmas time truce. When I realized that you were an anthropologist, somebody who was really looking at the humanity of the situation, that's when it got really interesting for me, because it started to apply, because I'm never going to negotiate on the global stage, right? But it really
you never
made
know.
Yes, let's hope I never need to. How about that? Right. But it really showed me that there's something, because you get results, and you get results in the highest tension environments, it showed me that there's a universal thread that connects all of these people, which I think is illustrated so beautifully by the blind woman along the path of Abraham, who says, I used to be invisible in my community, and now people see what I have to offer. Walk us through that.
Yeah, this was when we were just starting off 7 or 8, 9 years ago in the highlands of northern Jordan. This was a woman who was blind. Her husband was disabled. She had like 7 kids. But one thing she could do is make wonderful food. And wonderful food from the herbs and everything that was local growing around. She lives in the hills there in northern Jordan. And she lives not too far from the path. So our colleagues said, well, we're bringing groups to start to initiate this path. Could you offer them some lunch? And she said, for sure. And so they brought them to her home. She didn't have even a working toilet, but then she had some olives from her trees that she brought, and then we brought more groups, and pretty soon she fixed the toilet. Pretty soon she was planting more trees, and she became a kind of an entrepreneur. In fact, here 8 years later, I got an email recently saying, come and take classes from Ahmad. She said someone was advertising her, somewhere on the internet, So she's
to learn how to cook.
To learn how to cook.
Wow.
Cooking classes. So what she said to one of our colleagues was, she said, in a place where people were once ashamed to look at me, I'm now visible. I'm now being seen. And that's what every human being wants. They just want to be seen. The cheapest concession you can make in a negotiation is give someone basic respect. And to me, that's the key. It's just that, is if you can treat someone with basic respect, then you got a chance to try and sit down with them, see if you can persuade them, see if you can move forward.
That was the aha moment for me, reading your work. And if people take the time, which I highly encourage, to read your books, that was the big takeaway for me, is that when you approach from a positional standpoint, you say, okay, this is what I want to get out of this negotiation, and the other person's doing the same thing, it can become intractable. But when you stop and connect people to the humanity of the situation, and make that concession of respect, that there's fascinating studies that have been done. So if you take an Asian woman and right before she takes a math test, you remind her that she's a woman, she'll do worse on the test because of the stereotypes that women do worse on math. If, however, you take that same woman and right before the math test, you remind her that she's Asian, because of the stereotypes of Asians being better at math, she'll do better. Like, that's crazy. Yeah. And it tells me that reframe that you give people, simply by having them remember their humanity, to feel that respect for this, for this woman to completely change how she views herself in that society, and to go from feeling invisible to offering cooking classes, you begin to realize how it's not about the debate that happens at the bargaining table, if there's really going to be sort of real change. It's about how people begin to reframe their lives and their value and how they feel respected, which is pretty interesting. How'd you get onto that? Was that something from your anthropological studies you've always known, or?
That's a really good question. I study anthropology to understand human beings, and so I've always been focused on the human element of all of this. Because, I mean, basically, wherever you go, whether it's nuclear confrontation or whatever, it's just human beings you're dealing with. Right. I had this question when I was a boy of how can we deal with our differences? And so that's why I went into anthropology, was to answer that question. And I think in getting real life experience, it just, it was so blindingly obvious that this is the most fundamental human need, is to be seen, to feel like they're seen, that they're recognized, that they're acknowledged, that their humanity is seen. I mean, dignity really is what it's at the basis of it. And I've seen that everywhere. This coming Friday, I'm going to go visit President Carter, who's wow. And I remember him telling me a story of, when he was making peace between Israel and Egypt back in 1978 at Camp David. The prime minister of Israel was a guy named Menachem Begin, and then the president Sadat of Egypt. It was all kind of like very tense and positional, and it looked like everything, there wasn't going to be an agreement. And then at one point, Prime Minister Begin came over to his cabin because Carter had promised a photograph to sign for one of Begin's grandchildren. So Carter takes the opportunity there. Right. As he's signing, he says, "What would you like me to write?" He's signing it, whatever. And they have this moment where it's not head of state, but it's like grandfather and imagining your grandchildren. It humanizes it. And Begin at one point says, or Carter says, we're talking about what we're doing, all this kind of agreements, all these things. It's about the kind of world they're going to inherit, right? It's about the grandchildren. And at that moment, Begin made that final act of flexibility that allowed them to reach agreement.
Wow. It really speaks to your most recent book, Getting to Yes with Yourself, which you've called a prequel, if I'm not mistaken, right, to Getting to Yes and the other books that you've written. Walk us through the insight that led you to understand that the toughest person that we have to convince is usually ourselves, and it's not the person that we're sitting across from.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm always asking myself, what's in the way of us getting to yes? We all want to get to yes, and there's so many ways in which we can get to yes, but we get blocked. And when I used to ask people, so what's the biggest barrier? What makes it difficult to get to yes? And the most frequent question I always get is, it's that difficult person. It's my spouse, it's my child, it's a difficult enemy in a situation. We're quick to kind of point the finger, and so I actually wrote a subsequent book about, okay, so how do you get to yes when other people don't want to get to yes, when they're being difficult, and about how you negotiate with difficult people. It's called Getting Past No. But over the years, the more I was in all kinds of situations, whether they're family or business or international disputes, the more I realized that the most difficult person we ever have to deal with is the person we look at in the mirror every morning. It's right here. Right. Because it's in our own very simple, very understandable tendency, very human, to react, which is to act without thinking. As Ambrose Bierce once said, when angry, you will make the best speech you'll ever regret. And we do that all the time. We react out of fear, naturally, and fear of scarcity. There's not going to be enough for us. We act out of anger sometimes. We get ticked off. And when we do that, then things start to escalate. And so the ability to, I like to use the metaphor of going to the balcony. It's almost like we're negotiating up here on a stage. We're like actors on a stage. Part of our mind goes to a mental and emotional, maybe even a spiritual balcony, some place of perspective, a place of calm, a place of self-control, a place where we can keep our eyes on the prize. If we can do that, in other words, and we can get to yes with ourselves in that sense, then I found it's a lot easier to get to yes with others.
But what do you mean exactly when you say getting to yes? Like, so you're in that moment, it's heated. What does yes mean in that circumstance?
Yes to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. A yes to yourself means really understand, it's kind of knowing yourself. It's understanding what you truly want. What is it really that you most need? So it's a yes to your needs. It's an acceptance of yourself, because we all have this kind of...
Of what you really want.
Of what you really want. What's your deepest need?
tell us about the Hugo Chavez moment, because I think it's something people will really be able to relate to, because it's that moment of I have a decision to react or to not react and to ultimately get what I want. And I find that people a lot of times don't have their eye on what they're actually trying to accomplish, maybe because they don't know, but because they're taking their eye off for whatever reason of what they're actually trying to accomplish, and they give into that momentary fear, anger, frustration, whatever the case may be, they make it harder for themselves to get what they want. And this is a great tale of how fast something can change.
Yeah, I was invited to Venezuela. I was asked to go to Venezuela by President Carter, who was involved there, and the UN, because there were 1 million people on the streets demanding the downfall of the government of President Chavez, and 1 million people supporting him, and there was a lot of fear that this was going to turn into major civil violence, maybe even a civil war. During that time, I had a number of meetings with President Chavez, but in one of them, which the one you're talking about, he liked to meet at night, so he set the meeting for like 9 o'clock at night, and my colleague Francisco and I show up at the presidential palace and are waiting, and 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight. Finally, we're ushered in to see the president, expecting to find him alone. And in fact, he's got his entire cabinet arrayed behind him. So he motions me to a chair and he says, "So, Bill," he says, "what's your impression? How are things going here in Venezuela?" And I said, "Well, Mr. President, I've been talking to some of your ministers here. I've been talking to the leaders of the opposition. And, you know, I thought I'd put a positive frame on it. I said, and I'm hearing a little bit of progress." Well, that was not the right word to say, because as soon as he heard the progress, he got triggered. He said, "What do you mean progress? Are you blind? Are you not seeing all the dirty tricks those traitors on the other side are up to?" And he leaned in very close to my face and proceeded to shout at me for, I would say, approximately 30 minutes, if not more. And so...
It's a lot of shouting.
Yeah, and so I'm there, and I'm thinking, all this work for the last year and a half down the tubes, you know, the whole cabinet's witnessing this dressing down, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm not naive, and I'm thinking what I can say. You know, he's saying, "You're not seeing all these things." You know, that's the part of the mind that's just kind of reacting. But then somehow I remembered a friend of mine who was Peruvian had once told me, "Bill, if you're ever in a tough situation, remember to pinch the palm of your hand." And I said, "Hernan, why would I pinch the palm of my hand?" He said, "Well, because it'll give you some momentary pain and that'll keep you alert." And for whatever reason at that moment, I remembered to pinch the palm of my hand, and it helped me go to the balcony and ask the primary question you ask yourself on the balcony, which is, why am I here? What's my central purpose? Because that's what we lose sight of. We lose sight of the prize. And is it really going to advance the cause of peace if I get into an argument with the president of Venezuela?
Right.
And so I decided, okay, don't react. He could have gone on for hours and hours. But by simply not reacting and instead listening and paying attention to him and just nodding my head as he was shouting at me, I was just watching him from a balcony perspective, and you watch body language, and I saw his shoulders very slowly, slightly go down like this. And in a slightly weary tone of voice, he said to me, "So, Bill, what should I do?" That is the faint sound of a human mind opening, because essentially, it's like, you try to argue with someone who's in an irrational or angry state of mind. You get nowhere with reason. It's like banging your head against the wall. But by not reacting, by listening, there was a sudden opening there, and suddenly he was ready to hear. And I said, "Well, Mr. President, it's almost Christmas time. Last Christmas festivities were canceled. Why not give everyone a truce, give everyone a chance to go to the balcony collectively, the whole nation, and enjoy Christmas with the family, and then in January we can resume and people maybe will be in a better mood to listen." He said, "That's a great idea. I'm going to propose that in my next speech." And his mood had completely shifted. In fact, he said, "Over Christmas I'm going to travel around the country a little bit, and I'd like you to come with me because you ought to see the country." And then he thought for a moment. He said, "But wait a minute, you're neutral. You wouldn't be seen as neutral in my company. But don't worry, I'll give you a disguise."
Did you do it?
No, I had family plans. I had other negotiations. But that would have been an amazing thing. But what I learned from that is one of the greatest powers you have is the power not to react. It's the power to go to the balcony, get some perspective, ask yourself what's important here, and listen to the other side. And if you listen to them, maybe there's a chance they're going to listen to you.
How in that moment did you, other than pinching the hand, so you're feeling anxious, which tends to self-escalate, right? Like as you feel, your heart starts racing, the blood is leaving the prefrontal cortex, you're less capable of high-level cognition. How did you so quickly pull yourself back, get on the balcony, recenter, and then...
It's a good question. I've asked myself that same question. I think, you know, if you're able to observe, just even momentarily, then I'm able to say, then just notice what's happening. I notice that my cheeks are flushing, you know, sweat glands are starting, you know. Just notice the physical sensations first, and then the emotions, you know, like I'm feeling embarrassed, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling deflated. So just by noticing those things, the fact that I notice them, then I realize, and I'm not trying to suppress them, I'm just observing them. But just by noticing them, I neutralize their impact on me. Just because I'm one step distant from it.
Right.
And then in that moment, there's just a little bit of an opening for me to remember, what do I most want here? I mean, that's kind of the basic question. What's my yes?
Right.
What is my inner yes that's going to allow me to get to an outer yes? And my inner yes, I was really clear, was kind of my North Star, was I was there for the cause of peace in Venezuela.
That's really strong, and the concept of having a North Star, I think, is really critical. You've talked a lot about preparing for negotiation, and that anybody who does their work and prepares, they're going to have an advantage, and vice versa. If you don't prepare, you're going to have a disadvantage. You know, one thing that I think a lot about in terms of abstracting it from sort of world stage negotiation and just what do we all deal with on a daily basis, there's going to be a muddle of things in your mind that you want, right? In that moment, you wanted to react. In that moment, you wanted to explain to him that he was totally misreading you, that there really may have been progress, and for him to not acknowledge that is to make this whole situation worse, like that you can't even accept that we've made some progress. Like now you become part of the problem. But in that, you realize, okay, none of that serves me. None of that is my deepest purpose, which came from work you did before stepping on that stage. How do you do that preparation? So now that you've had that moment, you've walked yourself from extracting yourself out of the anxiety loop, embarrassment, whatever those muddle of emotions were, are you able to more quickly get out of that? And if so, is there anything beyond just focusing on your North Star that you use to calm or center?
Well, before I go into a meeting like that, like during those 3 hours that I was waiting there, you know, I try to meditate a little bit and just try to, because there's so much going on. You know, if I can just find some place of inner calm where puts things in perspective. So any practice, people have all kinds of, one of my favorite practices is to go for walks, actually. That's what I love to do. Because I find that walking grounds me, especially in nature, you know? It grounds me and gets your breath regular. And then also, to me, it's like setting your purpose before you go in. So negotiation is always about positions, the things that people say they want, very concrete, the money, the this, the that. But if you can go down behind the positions to what are the deepest interests and the deepest human needs, it's things like safety, freedom. And if you can guide yourself by those, then the negotiation becomes a lot easier.
What techniques do you have for people to uncover that about themselves? Like, how can somebody who doesn't actually know what they really most truthfully want, how can they discover that?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, you can ask yourself, I call it the 5 whys, which is, you know, like, well, I'll give you an example. I was talking with a guy who was chief sales director for a software company. And he was saying, I have real trouble because clients are always asking me to customize their products. And I find it really hard. I need to satisfy the customers, so we customize the products, and then it turns out we never made a profit. In fact, we lost. And what can I do? And so I said to him, so okay, imagine that you're in a situation with a customer. What is it you want? What are you concerned about? Why would you say no to the customer? I mean, what would be the impulse behind it? And he said, well, because we need to maintain revenues. I said, well, so that's the first why. I said, but let me ask you a second why. Why do you want to maintain revenues? He says, well, we got to make a profit. And I still didn't hear, I'm listening for, inside, is that really what's going to galvanize him? Make a profit? I said, why do you want to make a profit? Well, he turned around to everyone who was in the room there, all these employees. Well, so we can have a job. So I said, why do you want a job? He said, looked at me, he's startled each time because he's not expecting the next one. He says, so I can put food on my kid's table. I said, okay, next time you're with a customer, remember that you're trying to put food on your kid's table. That will give you the inner strength to say no to the customer when you need to say no. No, we can't customize it. Here's an off-the-shelf solution, and we can figure this out. In other words, drill down, keep on drilling down, so that consistent kind of thing till you drill down to where you feel, okay, there's real resonance. That's where your power is. Because the more powerful you can make that inner yes, the more easily you're going to get to an outer yes, and the more powerful you'll be in making sure your needs get met in that negotiation.
Yeah, that, oddly enough, the 5 whys is a technique we use in manufacturing whenever we want to find out why something went wrong, right? Because you get the first answer, but it's never going to make sense, and you go until you find that sort of resonant root cause of the problem. It's utterly fascinating to turn that on oneself and ask until you get to that moment of resonance. Is that something you've been able to do yourself without somebody from the outside asking those questions? Like, is that a sort of self-usable tool, or is it something that requires an outside voice?
Well, I think it is self-usable, and it's useful to have a coach. Even no matter, if you're an athlete going to the Rio Olympics, you can have a coach. You may be at the top of your game, so I think it's always useful to have someone who serves as your balcony. One thing I've trained. Had the pleasure of training some hostage negotiators. A generation ago, the way they used to handle those situations, which happen more frequently than you'd think, they would kind of go in John Wayne style, and they would pull out a bullhorn and say, "You've got 3 minutes to come out with your hands up." And then if the hostage taker didn't come out, then in would go the tear gas, and guns would come out. And often as not, the hostage is dead, the hostage taker is dead, a policeman's dead, or whatever. Wow. Then they learn, there's got to be a better way than this. And so now they have professional hostage negotiators. Instead of throwing the tear gas, they get on the phone. And what do? They listen. They listen to the hostage taker. They show them basic human respect. I mean, and they may have done terrible things, but they treat them as human beings. Maybe it takes 10 hours. Maybe it takes 15 hours. But in 99% of the cases, what happens? The hostage taker surrenders into police. The hostage is safe. And they're just using these elemental techniques of respecting someone, even if at first they don't respect you. Right. Listening to someone, even if at first they don't listen to you. Because the thing is, we go, sure, I'll give that other respect as long as they respect me. Respect me first.
Yeah, that's, if to be able to do that sort of self-administered and get to that point where you can really dig down and see, okay, what do I want? That's super powerful. The other thing that you're talking about, and this is when coming into the interview, the very first question I wrote down was, what is the universal thing that lets him go from Russia to the Bushman, right?
Yeah.
Like there's something, you're obviously tapping into something, and I think it's that. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what country, whether you grew up in a modern society or something that feels like it is from 1,000 years ago. It comes down to listening to people, showing them respect, allowing them their dignity, which may help get them out of an entrenched position rather than really that person being able to understand what it is exactly that they want and being able to deliver on that. It's really fascinating. I think that applies no matter what you're trying to do, whether you're negotiating with your kid, your spouse, your boss, whatever, really leading with those. What would you say for somebody who's negotiating sort of on the everyday level? What are like the 3 most important things they should do when going into a negotiation?
Well, prepare.
And what is preparing? Knowing your why?
Yeah, preparing, knowing your why, knowing your yes, knowing your underlying interests, right? That's key.
How do people not stop at the surface why? How do people not stop at I need to keep revenues
Well,
up?
this is where it's helpful to have a coach or a friend.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't have to be
someone to bounce
just
off.
Just a friend to bounce off and just say, look, I want to get to my why. Ask me these 5 whys, and don't stop until you feel that I've hit bedrock.
Right.
You know, that I've gotten to the roots of the tree.
Okay.
What do I really want? But then when you go in, as you mentioned, listening is the most simple behavior that's a mark of respect. Because we go in and we think, negotiators, they must be great talkers, persuasive talkers. But actually, I think even more important than talking in negotiation is the ability to listen. And it's not just listening to the words, it's listening to what's behind the words.
Right.
It's not just listening, it's listening for what's the feelings, where's that person coming from? Listening is about empathy, right? Empathy, you don't even have to have necessarily sympathy. Sympathy is feeling with. Empathy is feeling into. Empathy is, you want to have empathy with your enemies because you need to know your enemy, in a war situation. But so just listen, see if you can put yourself in their shoes for a moment and imagine what it's like, so that A, it shows respect, and B, it gives you incredibly valuable intelligence about where that person's coming from, which will make it much easier to influence them. Because after all, in negotiation, you're trying to influence someone. It means you're trying to change their mind. How can you change someone's mind if you don't know where their mind is?
Yeah, that's such a great way to say it.
And where their heart is. Kind of like really try to understand that. So to me, that's key. And then the other thing is to be really creative, is to say, look, there are ways to meet my needs and your needs. Let's see if maybe it's not our initial positions. Maybe there's a third way out there that's much better. One of the classic examples in negotiation, like to use sometimes, comes from one of the founders of modern management theory. It was a woman who lived in Boston over a century ago, whose name was Mary Parker Follett. She once observed 2 students quarreling in a library. One wanted the window open, the other wanted it closed. They got into a big quarrel. One goes, opens the window, the other one goes and slams the window shut. So finally, the librarian comes over and she asks the first one, well, why do you want the window open? That why question. I want some fresh air. She asks the second one, why do you want the window closed? The draft is blowing my papers around. So then she asks the magical question, well, how can we get you fresh air without you a draft? And then the 2 students think about it for a moment, and then they come up with a creative idea, a third option, which is, what if I open a window in the next room? That provides fresh air for the first person without a draft for the second. Now, every negotiation we get involved in, we start off with open window and closed window. I wanted this price, you wanted that price, I want this, I want that. We think of negotiation as just kind of sometimes like, what's the split the difference compromise? But in this case, a half open window would have satisfied neither. It would have been not enough fresh air and too much draft. What you find successful negotiations about is trying to go behind the position, the things they say they want, for what are the underlying needs, from the open window to fresh air, from the closed window to no draft. And then on the basis of those underlying interests or needs, which are the underlying motivations, you come up with, well, how do we satisfy both sides' interests? And then you come up with the equivalent of an open window in the next room. So that's the key, is to always ask the question, are there ways we can satisfy both sides' needs, and then be creative? Because we check our creativity at the door when we come into negotiation. We all have all this amazing creativity, but when we go into negotiation, it's just my position, your position. But in creativity, you think of, there are 10 different ways to do this.
Right.
And then you select one that makes sense.
That's really, really interesting. And you've talked a lot before about, as people entrench in their positions, ego begins to get tied up in it, and it gets harder to extract yourself. But if you're focused on creativity, you can ameliorate a huge part of that problem, which is super, super interesting. Yeah, I really like that.
The key is, we often approach, just our mindset when we go into negotiation is there's not enough. There's not going to be enough for me and for you. It's kind of like there's a fixed pie, And if any section of the pie you take, I don't get. If you go into the negotiation and you say, wait a minute, first question is, how can we expand the pie first before we divide it up? Then you're going to find there's going to be a lot more for everybody.
Yes. All right, now I have one more question for you. What is it that you most want in life? If that's what people are supposed to get to, that thing they want the most, what is the thing that you want most? Why are you doing all this? Running off to Russia and Chechnya and Venezuela? What's it all about?
Well, I guess, one way to put it is peace. That's my passion, I want to feel that when it comes my time to die, that I've looked back and I've said, I lived my life fully as I can, pursuing my passion. And my passion is, can we together, humanity, somehow, can we find a way to live in peace with each other? Because otherwise, given our modern technology, there might not be life for anybody in this planet. We're in a race right now. We're in a race. Our technology is, getting more and more capable, more and more destruction, easier to get a hold of that stuff. And then there's another race that we don't pay attention to, which is our social, our moral, our psychological capacity to live with each other, to deal with our differences. And we got to win that race. Can we learn to cooperate with each other, even in difficult circumstances? Because there's no problem, whether it's our world, problems of getting an income and all the things we want in life, to climate change or war or poverty. There's nothing that we can't solve if we can't learn to cooperate, to get to yes with each other.
That's fantastic. That is a big vision, and I think it's incredibly, incredibly beautiful. William, thank you so much for coming on today and spending time with us. This was really spectacular.
Great.
Thank you. Guys, this has been amazing. I hope you were paying attention, that we just had a very long conversation about negotiating, never once talking about getting your way, hammering your point home, pulling a fast one over on somebody. It was a conversation about humanity, about beauty, about peace, and this man's absolute passion for peace. I think that's so incredible, and it's incredible because it's so usable. This is somebody who's out there averting civil wars and de-escalating nuclear tensions. This is not somebody who's saying it from the privacy of a home somewhere in Idaho, writing books on a subject that he does not know about. This is somebody who has been on the front lines for 40 years, despite the lack of aging that is happening here. I'm getting older sitting next to my It is absolutely incredible. It's one of those times where, as you begin to look at somebody's worldview, you come to fundamentally understand why they have had such an unprecedented level of success. They're approaching it from something that is fundamental. It's just true of human nature. And it didn't come up in this conversation, but he has cited an Einstein quote before that I think is particularly relevant, and that is, all people have to make one really important decision, and that's to decide whether the universe is friendly or hostile. And while we didn't talk about it here, I'm going to guess that he believes that it's friendly. I'm going to guess that you believe that there are things that will come together for you. They're working for you. I encourage you guys all to view the world that way and to see that one of his answers was, in preparation for a big moment, you go inward and you look at yourself and you really assess what you want and what you're trying to accomplish. You find that tranquility. I can't tell you how positive that is, whether you're trying to run a business, be the best parent, or end a civil war. Is truly a miraculous way to look at yourself and your contributions. And one last thing that I hope you guys picked up that was ringing in my ears the whole time he was talking, that if you point a finger at somebody else, then you give away your power. If you look inward and find out how you can give respect, connect as a human, that you maintain the power and can move it forward. He told several stories to which that is the only natural conclusion. William, thank you again so much.
Thanks,
Where
Tom.
can people find you? Because they need to find you.
Through my website, actually, which is just williamury.com.
All right, perfect. I've been there. It's amazing. WilliamUry.com, URY.com.
And on Twitter and Facebook at William Ury GTY.
GTY.
Like getting to yes.
Come on. All right, guys. Thank you for following. You can hit us up at InsideQuest.com. You can follow us at InsideQuest, and you can follow me at Tom Bilyeu, which will come up on the screen, because my wife hates it when I spell it out loud, so I'll just let it pop up there. Guys, until next week, be legendary, my friends. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Really a pleasure.